The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. I got a social media note tonight from Beverly Foy, who's one of our faithful followers, and she has...
Hi, Beverly.
She has kind of a complaint. She said, Lawrence should tell us in advance if he's taking a week off so I can plan my schedule accordingly. And I was not taking a week off, and I can understand how she thought I was because I've been missing for the last 2 days, under the weather, with a very quick passing health storm that is completely behind me. But it forced me then to tell Beverly directly on social media, and I'll tell you, but it's just for you and Beverly. She said, I should say in advance when I'm taking the week off. I am taking next week off. I'm going to be on vacation next
Now
week.
People know.
It's really just you and Beverly. I want to know this.
It's just between us, the three of us.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you, Lawrence, if I had traveled the last 2 days anywhere, people would have stopped me and asked me, where is Lawrence O'Donnell and is he okay? Because I get that question anytime I'm traveling when you're off. So there you go. Maybe I see Beverly, but there are a lot of Beverlys out there.
He was pretty okay. He was almost, but not quite, able to sit in this chair for an hour. And so, but now I can. Now it's completely over, and here we go.
Well, Beverly and I and everyone are happy you're back.
Okay. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. It was another day of stunning defeats for Donald Trump around the world this time. From New York City to Rome, where Donald Trump was crushed once again in his war with the Pope, the only war with a Pope ever launched by an American president. Donald Trump's day of humiliation and defeat came once again as a result of traps Donald Trump set for himself. The unifying element of every trap Donald Trump has set for himself is Donald Trump's complete and total ignorance of what he was getting himself into. When Donald Trump decided to become the first president in history with the power to set tariffs, even though the Constitution, the very first law of the land, gave that power to Congress, Donald Trump set a timer on his constitutional humiliation, which was delivered to him earlier this year by the United States Supreme Court, agreeing with the Federal Court of International Trade that Donald Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional and illegal. And tonight, the federal government is steadily refunding $166 billion in tariffs illegally collected by Donald Trump, refunding those tariffs to Americans and American companies that paid those tariffs. Today, that same Federal Court of International Trade, which resides in Lower Manhattan, close to the docks, that were once the center of America's international trade, ruled against another set of Donald Trump's tariffs, finding them illegal and unconstitutional. And this ruling carries for me a particular personal joy because of who the judges relied on in writing their opinion. And pardon me for a moment here, but I'm going to digress to talk about those people. And don't worry, I'm going to get to Kashyap Patel. We're going to get to the corruption of Donald Trump as cataloged by the New York Times with one of the reporters who won a Pulitzer Prize for reporting on Trump corruption. Andrew Weissman is going to join us to tell us if, in his years as counsel to the FBI director, it was common for the FBI director to travel with cases of whiskey, as Kashyap Patel does. And we're going to get to the violation of the ceasefire in Donald Trump's war with Iran, a violation that Donald Trump is, from the depths of his perversity, calling a love tap tonight. We're going to get to all of that and more, but first, the people who crushed Donald Trump's tariffs in that federal court ruling today. The judges who wrote that opinion relied on unnamed people. I don't know, but I feel like I know. People before my time, exactly 20 years before my time. The staffs of the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, who are the people who really wrote the Trade Act of 1974. It is thankless work, celebrated by no one. The staffs of those committees never got applause. But 52 years after they spent what I know were countless hours, including all-night sessions, writing and negotiating the Trade Act of 1974 as it went from the Senate Finance Committee to the Senate floor to Senate passage, after passage in the House of Representatives and the House Ways and Means Committee, and then a negotiated final version of the bill written by the House Ways and Means Committee staff and the Senate Finance Committee staff together, where they pored over every single word. And because they chose each of those words as carefully as they did, Donald Trump lost in the Court of International Trade today, and the Constitution won 52 years after the dedication of those unknown Senate and House staffers, all experts on international trade, shined through to the judges who studied every word of their work. And on page 32 in the court's ruling today, the Court of International Trade, where all of the judges are experts on international trade, said, quote, "It is clear that Congress was aware of the differences in the words it chose. Congress adopted balance of payments deficits as an issue to be addressed in Section 122A, while it employed the phrase balance of trade surpluses in Section 122C. The balance of payments is different, a totally different thing from the balance of trade." And Donald Trump relentlessly argued to the Court of International Trade that he was justified in imposing his tariffs because of the emergency power granted to him in one clause of that act to deal with what the staffs so carefully described as the balance of payments deficits. The court said that the standard for measuring the balance of payments deficits, which was specified by the staff of the Senate Finance Committee in their report on the legislation at the time, does not justify Donald Trump's absurd imposition of 10% worldwide tariffs. And once again, the Court of International Trade had to quote a line of the Constitution that every president used to understand, quote, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises." And once again, the court had to state plainly what everyone writing the Constitution knew and what every economist knows, quote, "The power to tax includes the power to impose tariffs." As the Supreme Court's Chief Justice John Roberts put it, tariffs are taxes. Imagine 52 years ago, you're 34 years old, you're 42 years old, you're on the staff of the International Trade section of the Senate Finance Committee, working away with legislative counsel at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to express clearly what this small piece of a much larger piece of legislation is really about. And you identify those words, balance of payments. And you make sure those words exist in the staff reports of what this legislation is really about. And 52 years later, those words that you thought might just sleep silently in this legislative record forever become the words that crush Donald Trump's attack on the Constitution that you could never have seen coming. 20 years later, I had one of those jobs in the Senate Finance Committee, and I was in awe of Marcia Miller and Eric Beale and the experts on the international trade staff working on that committee, and Joe Gale and the experts on taxation working on that committee, and Margaret Malone and Faye Drummond working on Social Security policy and welfare policy, and our team of experts on Medicare and Medicaid, all of those things within the jurisdiction of just one committee. And every one of those people worried about every word that went into law, every word. They labored over every word. The senators knew how valuable those people were and thanked them all, but the public never knows. And that's why people like Elon Musk were able to invade the American government and just fire people who devoted their lives to developing the kind of expertise that has been the best part of our government during our lifetimes. You can't thank those people if you don't know they exist. And you cannot appreciate those people if you don't know what they do. And so at the same time that Donald Trump elevated Elon Musk to the position where Elon Musk was literally taking food away from starving people in the middle of a famine, people starving to death at the same time that Elon Musk was taking life-saving HIV medications and other medications away from pregnant mothers in Africa and other poor people around the world in what Bill Gates called, quote, the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children. At the very same time, Donald Trump was making this guy the director of the FBI. The people I met working in government, the people who I worked with closely on the Senate Finance Committee were all more dedicated and more expert in their specialties than I was. I was completely dependent on them as the generalist who was in charge of all of the work that the committee staff was doing. And I was in awe of them and remain in awe of them. And there is not anyone working in the FBI tonight. There is not anyone working in government tonight. There is not anyone working in the White House tonight. There's not anyone in America tonight who is in awe of Donald Trump's FBI director. And of course, Donald Trump's FBI director has dug himself into deeper scandal just in the last 24 hours after suing The Atlantic in what is obviously a frivolous lawsuit after The Atlantic reported on his incompetence and unprofessional behavior. And The Atlantic has now produced the bottle. The Atlantic actually has a bottle of Kash Patel bourbon that The Atlantic is reporting the director of the FBI flies around the world with. Personalized bourbon bottles in the taxpayer-provided FBI jet. And I know it is easy to assume that Donald Trump feels no pain, has never felt any pain. And there is one pain, though, that I suspect he has probably felt. And it is a pain shared by millions of us, millions of people around the world. And that is the pain of watching a loved one trapped in alcoholism. Donald Trump's older brother slipped into alcoholism to the point that he could never again get real control of his life. And Donald Trump watched him die young. The one thing I have in common with Donald Trump is that he has never been drunk. Donald Trump has never had a drink. And so just imagine how much Donald Trump hates, as The Atlantic has reported, seeing Kash Patel publicly reveling in what sure looks like inebriation on the job. And I say on the job because Kash Patel claimed that his trip to Milan, where he watched the Olympic hockey team, was a business trip paid for by you. So that's your FBI director on the job with that bottle in his hand. Donald Trump would love to get rid of that guy. Donald Trump would love for Kash Patel to disappear. But Kash Patel is a trap Donald Trump has set for himself, and Donald Trump knows that the biggest cheers that will erupt at Kash Patel's downfall will come from the people who have never voted for Donald Trump. Those cheers would come from the people who Donald Trump hates more than watching Kash Patel drown himself in booze in a locker room. And so Kash Patel keeps his job as long as Donald Trump remains in the trap he has set for himself with his FBI director. Donald Trump's ceasefire in his war in Iran was broken today, but Donald Trump doesn't want to admit it because he doesn't want his ceasefire to end, because if it does, he is back fully in the trap he set for himself by going to war with Iran. At 5:33 p.m. tonight, CENTCOM released a statement saying, quote, U.S. forces intercepted unprovoked Iranian attacks and responded with self-defense strikes as U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz to the Gulf of Oman. May 7th, Iranian forces launched multiple missiles, drones, and small boats. No U.S. assets were struck. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, eliminated inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces, including missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. That is the military's official complete description of the incident. No damage done to any American assets. Iran broke the ceasefire by attacking United States Navy vessels, and the Navy responded in a purely defensive way. And the last line of the CENTCOM statement defies everything Donald Trump said he would do if Iran did not immediately, last week or the week before, reach a deal with him, and what Donald Trump would do if Iran ever broke the ceasefire. The last line of the CENTCOM statement says, quote, CENTCOM does not seek escalation, but remains positioned and ready to protect American forces. That is Donald Trump in official CENTCOM language telling the Iranians, please don't do it again. And don't worry, we aren't going to actually attack you now. Donald Trump, in one of those ludicrous, fake phone interviews he does with selected reporters, got on the phone with ABC's Rachel Scott, who reported on Twitter, quote, Donald Trump tells me in a phone call, the retaliatory strikes against Iranian targets are just a love tap. It's just a love tap. When I asked if it means the ceasefire is over, no, the ceasefire is going. It's in effect. Just a love tap. Words never used by a president of the United States before. Words never used by anyone in a war before. Words never used by anyone in the military before. I think what that language might be telling us is just how far gone Donald Trump's brain is, how tiny his vocabulary is, and importantly, how afraid he is of Iran taking even more action against the United States, to which Donald Trump would then feel compelled to respond militarily, thereby ruining his ceasefire, which was already ruined. A ceasefire is not a little bit of fire back and forth. A ceasefire is no fire. And Donald Trump cannot achieve and maintain a ceasefire with Iran because Iran apparently is still not afraid of Donald Trump. Iran is still not afraid of firing at U.S. Navy vessels, no matter how many times Donald Trump threatens to commit war crimes against Iran and blow Iran off the face of the earth. Iran keeps saying to Donald Trump, we are not afraid of you. And Donald Trump doesn't know what to do. So Donald Trump says it's just a love tap. And CENTCOM says CENTCOM does not seek escalation. Wasn't CENTCOM supposed to obey Donald Trump's illegal order to blow Iran off the face of the earth for stuff like this? Donald Trump issued a social media post about the violation of the ceasefire in which he revealed that he doesn't know what an ocean is. A president of the United States actually referred to the Strait of Hormuz as an ocean, thereby becoming the first president in history who doesn't know what an ocean is. And no one in the world is surprised that in Donald Trump's continuous display of abject ignorance about elementary school facts, he doesn't know what an ocean is. Donald Trump's social media post about his war will be ignored in this country, where 66% disapprove of Donald Trump's war. And 57% disapprove of Donald Trump's war with the Pope. A new Washington Post poll had this question, quote, Trump posting, I don't want a Pope who thinks it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Do you have a positive or negative reaction? And 57% said they had a negative reaction to that. That percent would have skyrocketed well into the 80s or more if the Washington Post poll had just pointed out, as the Pope has done, that Donald Trump is lying when he says that the Pope thinks it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. What if the polling question said, what do you think about Donald Trump lying about the Pope saying that? It is entirely possible that most of the people in the Washington Post poll don't know that the Pope has never said that it's okay for Iran or any country to have a nuclear weapon. And so Pope Leo this week had to take it upon himself to, in effect, call Donald Trump a liar, point out Donald Trump's lie, saying, quote, if someone wants to criticize me for proclaiming the gospel, let him do so truthfully. The church for years has spoken against all nuclear weapons. So there's no doubt there. Donald Trump sent sometimes Catholic Marco Rubio to Rome today in a peace-seeking mission with the Pope, something no other American president has had to do. Marco Rubio was born into Catholicism before switching to the Mormon Church, then to evangelical Christian, and in his last religious turn, or I should say most recent religious turn, because we don't know if it's going to be his last religious turn, he is back to Catholicism. If you're wondering if Marco Rubio might have been struggling to choose the most politically convenient religion for a future in politics, it is interesting that he became a Mormon when his family moved to Nevada, where Senator Harry Reid was a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints and one of the powerful Nevada politicians at the time. And then, when evangelicalism shot up to prominence in Republican politics, Marco Rubio joined an evangelical megachurch. And now, Marco Rubio is back to Catholicism. The recently chosen religion, J.D. Vance, who spoke of his atheism before finding a religion that could be compatible with a political career if the Pope weren't such a peace-loving preacher of the gospel. Donald Trump's war with the Pope is a trap of his own making. It is a trap that comes from one of Donald Trump's most reliable character flaws, his publicly stated belief that if anyone ever criticizes you or criticizes something you are involved in, like, say, your war with Iran, you must attack that person, no matter who that person is. That is a Trump principle. No person too small for Donald Trump to attack. No person too big for Donald Trump to attack. No person too apolitical, like the Pope, for Donald Trump to attack. And so now Donald Trump is trapped in himself, with his own voters now able to see finally sparks of who he really is, how deeply, deeply perverse he really is. The Washington Post poll shows that 87% of Americans have a negative view of this, depicting what the Washington Post poll called, quote, an image appearing to depict himself as Jesus. 87% have a negative view of that. But the most important number in that poll is that 80% of the people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 have a negative view of Donald Trump depicting himself as Jesus Christ. 80% of Donald Trump's most recent voters see Donald Trump in that image the same way that we do, the same way any sane, decent person would see Donald Trump in that sick image. No opponent of Donald Trump has been able to get Trump voters to see Donald Trump negatively. But the person who broke through, the person who got 80% of Trump voters to have a negative reaction to Donald Trump was Donald Trump himself. Because Trump traps himself. Senator Adam Schiff will join us after this break. Even one of the friendly reporters the defense secretary now takes questions from at his briefings noticed that Donald Trump has completely capitulated on his demand for unconditional surrender by Iran.
On the seventh day of the conflict, in a Truth Social post, the president said, quote, "There will be no deal with Iran except, all caps, exclamation mark, unconditional surrender." What happens to that pledge to the Iranians? And when did the president decide to capitulate on his demand for unconditional surrender?
Well, James, I wouldn't. You started out nicely, but you ended exactly where we knew you would end. The president hasn't capitulated on anything. He holds the cards.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Schiff, unconditional surrender means you're not negotiating anything. And here's Donald Trump every day, basically publicly begging Iran to negotiate something with him.
Lawrence, he's really demonstrated that he's a weak and incompetent president, and even weaker in the course of this war. He started out, as you just pointed out, with this declaration that Iran was going to have to unconditionally surrender. Even now, Hegseth claims that we hold all the cards, and yet the president orders ships to escort to other vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, and we get fired upon. And the president says, no worries, that doesn't upset the ceasefire. Just pretend it didn't happen. And imagine this, Lawrence. I find this to be the most striking part of it. Saudi Arabia, for all that this administration has done in every way catered to Saudi Arabia tells the administration that it may not use its airspace to escort these ships through the Strait of Hormuz. This is why that escort operation came to a rapid halt. The weakness of the administration, the weakness of this president, that the Saudis would feel empowered to say no to the use of our vessels, the risk to our sailors, to escort ships, including those carrying Saudi oil. It's breathtaking. But Iran now feels empowered. It feels like the clock is ticking on its side. It feels the president is desperate for a deal. You hear the president talking about a deal basically that sounds a lot like the deal that Barack Obama struck that he so ridiculed. And he wishes to distinguish it somehow by saying, no, this deal will be different because in this deal, Iran promises not to develop a bomb. Well, I guess that's really something. We can now rely on Iran's word. So we are just seeing, as you said, the president having trapped himself, growing weaker and weaker, and sadly, he has also trapped the country, and we're paying for it. Prices are now 50% higher at the pump, and Donald Trump said today that if they went up another 50% and we're paying double, that it would be worth it. Well, I don't think the American people feel this is worth it at all.
And of course, in that deal negotiated by Secretary of State John Kerry for President Obama and 5 other countries, Iran did in writing promise to never develop a nuclear weapon. They've already put it in writing, and Donald Trump, who obviously never read a word of that agreement, just ripped it up and now is begging to please put that agreement back together.
It certainly sounds that way. And unfortunately, even if we went back to the JCPOA, Iran now feels that it has the leverage because it can shut down the strait. And any threat that it might shut down the strait, for example, if it doesn't abide by any deal struck with President Trump in the future, and the president threatens to snap back sanctions, which is basically the same mechanism as under the Obama JCPOA, Iran can threaten, well, if you snap back sanctions, we're going to close the strait. And that now is a powerful threat that really wasn't the case before this ill-considered and unlawful war. So tragically, I think this regime is emerging more powerful, at least it feels it's more powerful, more entrenched, more hardline, more of a threat to its own people. It's the result of entering a war without thinking about the consequences and conducting it incompetently, and the fundamental weakness of this president.
Senator Adam Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, MS Now has new reporting tonight about Donald Trump's FBI director in panic mode. Andrew Weissmann, who was counsel to the FBI, will join us next. We have breaking news tonight from MS Now's Carol Leonnig and Ken Delaney with the reporting about the panicked paranoia and desperation of Donald Trump's FBI director, Kashyap Patel. Quote, FBI Director Kash Patel ordered the polygraphing of more than 24 former and current members of his security detail, as well as other staff, and has been described as being in panic mode to save his job and find leakers among his team, according to 2 people briefed on the development. This comes a day after The Atlantic, which is being sued by Kashyap Patel for previous reporting about him, reported that Patel, quote, has given out bottles of his personalized whiskey to FBI staff as well as civilians he encounters in his duties, according to 8 people. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic, published a note today about Kashyap Patel's lawsuit against The Atlantic, saying that nothing will deter us from our work And while he was at it, he included a picture of the FBI director's personalized bourbon bottle that the Atlantic managed to buy from someone who said Patel gave it to him at an event in Las Vegas. The FBI responded to the Atlantic. Senior bureau officials have long exchanged commemorative items in formal gift settings consistent with ethics rules. Director Patel has followed all applicable ethical guidelines and pays for any personal gift himself. Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. And Andrew, so the FBI people clearly not denying one word about the Patel bourbon that is carried by the caseload on his plane, just saying everybody does it.
Yes, not only they're not denying it, they're admitting it. And so what we have here is an FBI director who does not, to put it bluntly, understand the nature of his responsibilities to the public. The idea that you would polygraph people because they are saying truthful information about your conduct is not something that is a secret, that it should be kept from the public who you serve. It's not like there is an sort of polygraphing because the leaks are about an ongoing criminal or national security investigation. That's not what we're talking about. That would be a legitimate use of the polygraph. But here we're talking about something that the public has a right to know because the FBI director works for the public, not vice versa. And so this is really a sign of just a fundamental misunderstanding about his role in connection with running the Bureau and what he owes the public. And the idea that this is something that's going on at the FBI, I mean, it is so sickening to me, having worked there, that everybody at the FBI, the men, the women, and the agents, the analysts, the staff, all deserve better, and the public deserves better.
How drunk should an FBI director be? How often? What is the standard? What are the odds of the FBI director getting a call in the middle of the night where you'd really want the director to be sober?
So that's what you call a softball question. And the idea that you have the FBI saying everybody did this. Could you imagine Robert Mueller? This is a man who is famous for never at any speech ever wanting to talk about himself. You always had to take out the word I or me from a speech because he didn't want to do that. There are very, very strict rules at the FBI about alcohol consumption. For one thing, the agents are armed. And so obviously you can't have any alcohol in that situation. But of course, you are completely aware that you may have to respond to a national security crisis at any moment, and so there is just no alcohol whatsoever. And that's leaving aside the idea that you would actually use the FBI insignia for personal use as a token to give to people. That's something that, obviously is not something that everyone does. That is not something that Chris Wray or Louis Freeh or Robert Mueller would engage in any circumstances.
So the reporting indicates that Patel is in his office and he won't speak to all sorts of people at the highest levels working in the FBI because he's afraid of which one of them might be informers on him. But if Patel is completely incompetent, isn't it better that he's just locked alone in his office, not talking to anyone?
Okay, so that is an interesting question because here's the way I answer that. Having seen the way that an FBI director needs to function, having a leader of an organization in a crisis is critical. Yes, of course, having somebody who's completely incompetent and if the reporting is correct, and also inebriated is obviously somebody who you do not want there. But again, we are owed more. I really can't stress, having been in that, been the general counsel, how important it is to have senior, experienced people with judgment and the ability to sift through facts, to be able to call the shots about what needs to be done. We're not talking about minor issues here. We're talking about the safety of America against the most heinous and hideous and potentially devastating crimes.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight with your invaluable expertise in this issue. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Andrew will be appearing in New York City at the 92nd Street Y on Tuesday, May 19th to discuss his new book, Liar's Kingdom, How to Stop Trump's Deceit and Save America. And coming up, the Trump National Golf Course in Syria. Yes, that's a thing. And that scheme has been exposed in New York Times continuing coverage of Donald Trump's profiting from the presidency, for which the New York Times has won a Pulitzer Prize. One of those Pulitzer Prize winning reporters, Eric Lipton, joins us next. Eric Lipton, our next guest, is one of the most important authors of the first draft of history, to whom we should all be deeply grateful, and historians will be deeply grateful too, when they look back on this period 50 years from now and 100 years from now. Eric Lipton is an invaluable member of the New York Times team of reporters who won the 2026 Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting for what the Pulitzer Prize Board calls, quote, deeply reported stories that exposed how President Trump has shattered constraints on conflicts of interest and exploited the money-making opportunities that come with power, enriching his family and allies. Eric Lipton's latest article is titled, Syrian Billionaires Needed a Favor in Washington. They Invoked the Trump Name. Eric Lipton reports on Syrian-born billionaire brothers, the Khayats, who successfully lobbied Donald Trump to lift U.S. sanctions on Syria in late 2025 to secure over $12 billion in government-sponsored contracts to rebuild Syria. Last summer, one of the brothers, Mohammed al-Khayat, met with Republican Congressman Joe Wilson of South Carolina. Eric Lipton writes, quote, Mr. Wilson himself, a former real estate lawyer and proponent of the sanctions repeal, offered a tactical suggestion. I know how to get the president's attention, Mr. Wilson said. Make it a Trump National Golf Course in Syria. Mohammed al-Khayat was already a step ahead. He said he had planned to propose a Trump-branded resort. At the same time, his two older brothers were negotiating an even bigger real estate partnership with Ivanka Trump, the president's elder daughter, and Jared Kushner, her husband, to help them finance a multi-billion-dollar resort in Albania. Such a mixing of personal and diplomatic affairs has long been the norm in Middle Eastern nations, where a small set of players have historically run and profited from their dominant role in society, but it has become the way Washington operates in Mr. Trump's second term, too. Business discussions involving the president's family, be it merely aspirational, like the golf course, or active, like Mr. Kushner's project, are consistently blurred with important policy decisions or consequential nation-to-nation negotiations. When Mohammed al-Khayat returned to Washington, he presented Joe Wilson with, quote, a special stone celebrating the proposed golf course carved with the Trump family emblem. Mr. al-Khayat then joined meetings with other lawmakers to push the sanctions repeal. Weeks later, legislation for permanent repeal won approval in Congress and was signed into law by Mr. Trump in late December. Joining us now is New York Times investigative reporter Eric Lipton. And Eric, first of all, congratulations on your Pulitzer. I know it's your fourth, but I'm sure it still feels pretty great. This reporting on a Syrian Trump golf course and it actually working, the strategy of getting these sanctions repealed appears through your reporting to have actually worked.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of reasons why it was appropriate to lift the sanctions at this point. There had been overthrown the leader in Syria, and it was time for the United States to consider a new approach. But the issue was that the same family that had lined up $12 billion in reconstruction contracts participated in the lobbying discussion. There was one of the brothers was here on Capitol Hill pushing for the repeal of the sanctions, and the problem is that when you have a family that is both helping make these decisions about United States policy, that has business interest in how this policy will play out, then it blurs the lines. It creates an appearance of a conflict of interest. And it just, the frequency with which we're seeing this in the second term of President Trump really doesn't have a precedent in American history. It's played out with cryptocurrency. It's played out with deals involving the governments of Saudi Arabia and Doha. And, again and again, we're seeing in Vietnam, we're seeing examples of the Trump family has business deals that seem to, walk through some of the same policy discussions that Mr. Dad President is involved with.
And this is something President Obama mentioned in his interview with Stephen Colbert, that this is one of the things that we now really need legislation about. We went through every president prior to Donald Trump and just expecting them to observe the norm that you don't try to do business when you're president of the United States. You don't try to enrich yourself. And Donald Trump showed that without strict laws forbidding it, he's going to do it. And who knows, maybe with strict laws forbidding it, he still would have done it.
Yeah, the president and vice president are the only two federal employees who are exempt from a federal criminal conflict of interest law that prohibits him from taking an action that can benefit himself. And so there is no formal prohibition on it. But that said, presidents, Democrat and Republican, have, throughout history, taken steps to avoid, divesting, putting things into blind trust, to try to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. President Trump and his family decided that's not necessary.
When you're looking at this mass of corruption, how do you decide as a team which items to pick and focus on?
I mean, we spent much of last year examining cryptocurrency because there were, literally, more than $1 billion in revenues were coming to President Trump and his family. This is just, when you compare that to the Trump Hotel at DC during his first term, when the Saudis were, renting out rooms or people were buying drinks at the bar. I mean, that was trivial relative to the, $1 billion or more in additional wealth to the Trump family. So, we focused on the biggest dollar amounts. And then at the same time, and with the crypto, my colleagues and I, there were a bunch of us that worked on these stories that were recognized for the Pulitzer. There was national security questions because they were at the same time as they got a $2 billion infusion of money from the United Arab Emirates. President Trump was agreeing to give them access to these advanced artificial intelligence chips and raising questions even in the White House about whether or not that was going to compromise national security. So, I mean, these are hugely important issues that were playing out that the president had a personal financial interest in. So that's what we focused on. But we're now broadening our view to look, it's happening all over the place. And the answer is we do one thing at a time. It's the same thing I tell my kids. Daddy does one thing at a time. That's the way that we've got to approach these stories. There's so many examples in front of us. We just have to take our time and go through them and document them and then share them with the public.
New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter Eric Lipton, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Eric Lipton gets tonight's last word.